All right. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. So I am Vanessa Cordova, the director of the Great Cities Institute, and we're very happy that you joined us here to welcome Stephen Small, Professor Stephen Small, who's here at the University of California, Berkeley. Stephen and I have known each other since the early 80s, very early 80s. We've been friends all this time, and it's really such a great treat for me to host him here at the Great Cities Institute here at the University of Illinois, Chicago. So in between this time, Stephen has done incredible work. I just looked at you, David. I said, Stephen has done incredible work over these last many years. He's a native of Liverpool and he's really very much a Renaissance man, though speaks multiple languages, has traveled all around the world, lived in various parts of the world. But his true love is his roots in Liverpool. And he's going to share with us today some of his insights about race in Liverpool, and prove that the best thing that came out of Liverpool was not just the Beatles, but
Okay, well, thank you very much, Teresa. I appreciate that greatly. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for attending. I appreciate that you're able to come here on this cold and chilly Chicago afternoon. My special thanks to my lifelong friend and colleague, Professor Teresa Cordova, who, as she mentioned, we've known each other since I first arrived in the United States in the 1980s. Many thanks also to her colleagues who have put together the marvelous flyer, did the event promotion, and have organized the Zoom. I remain in your debt. The research and insights I'm sharing with you today are motivated by my desire to deepen and expand knowledge of Black Liverpool, both past and present, and to explore the implications on Liverpool for developing a better understanding of the urban experience across Black Britain, more generally, at the end of the 20th century. At the end of the 20th century, the overwhelming majority of Black people in Britain were concentrated in cities, and they remain so today. What I want to persuade you is that while Black Liverpool shares similar experiences with other cities in Britain, there are distinct differences too, and those differences are consequential, especially for expressions of Black identity, mobilizations for social justice, and self-determination. My forthcoming book, entitled Black Liverpool is the Real Thing, West African, West Indian, and Afro-American Culture at the End of the 20th Century, a book to be published by Liverpool University Press next year. This book explores the arrival, embrace, and transformation of cultural patterns in Liverpool from across the African diaspora and the continent of Africa, patterns embraced by Black men and women in the city itself. But my focus today is not primarily on diaspora culture, but rather on how Liverpool as an urban centre was shaped by history and place, and how the unfolding of city politics and racism and the growth of the nation's longest standing Black population gave rise to unique forms of resistance in the second city of empire. Okay, so I'll give that. So let me draw it to a conclusion. So the foremost scholars of sociology and political economy in Britain have identified and unraveled the key variables, as I've said. Their focus has been primarily on World War II, post-World War II West Indians in general, and London in particular. Very important work. However, London is not representative or not even indicative. We would hardly find it acceptable in the US to generalize about Black people here based only on New York. I'm sure people in Chicago would not be happy about that. We wouldn't base an analysis of Black people in Brazil based only on Rio de Janeiro, or Black people in France based on Paris, in the Netherlands based on Amsterdam, and so forth. And therefore, we shouldn't accept it. Not therefore, but similarly, we do not accept it. Each city has its unique history and its distinct differences. Slavery turned the village of Liverpool into a town based on the exploitation of enslaved Africans in the West Indies. Imperialism turned the town of Liverpool into a city based on the exploitation of subordinated Africans in West Africa. In that regard, as Gus John has pointed out, a more comprehensive and complete analysis of Black Britain must begin a long time before the arrival of the Empire Windrush, and must look beyond West Indians and their children. By providing these insights into the urban experience of Black Liverpool
I seek to expand and enrich our understanding of the city beyond slavery into imperialism at the end of the 20th century. And I seek to broaden and deepen our understanding of Black Britain beyond Black London. And with that final point, I rest my case and I welcome comments and questions. Thank you. Certainly, let's open it up to questions or comments or criticisms. I think we have 15 minutes. Yeah, please go ahead.
My question has to do with the soccer.
Sorry, with the
Soccer and music.
with soccer and music,
The cultural
yeah.
influences of the Black community in Liverpool, starting from whenever, I would think they would be very, very prominent, might be prominent to some extent in sports and in music circles. And I'm particularly interested because the Beatles, who were their influences? Were Black blues musicians from the United States. Were there any other influences from Liverpool that they might have taken from or interacted with that you might know? Was there any mixture of races in music circles and or in sports?
Yeah, okay.
And I forgot to mention World War II. Did not Black community participate in British military?
Sure.
And after when it came back, how did that impact?
Okay. Well, let me begin with the third point, which is that Harold Adolphus Phillips, who became the manager of the Beatles, actually was from Trinidad and signed up with the British Army, no, the British Royal Air Force, and came to England with the Royal Air Force. I think he was young. No, he was definitely too young, and he lied about his age and came there. And after he got out and went back to Trinidad, they were, I think, sent back. He then returned to England, and he knew about Liverpool, and that's why he came to Liverpool. So there were at least tens of thousands, maybe more, West Indian, primarily member, a lot of women too, who were involved in World War II because they were British subjects who became citizens. There were also at least tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of men and probably women, certainly women, in West Africa and other parts of Africa, including as well as in India and elsewhere in the British Empire. So when they came back after the First World War and the Second World War, unceremoniously, and compared to the riots after African Americans came back from the First World War here, Black men and women in Liverpool and in London faced so-called race riots, better described as anti-Black riots. So there was unemployment, people had been, away from work and came back. And so, yeah, there were so-called race riots in 1919. There were so-called race riots in the 1940s. There's an article, the author slips my name, it's called When Jim Crow Met John Bull. John Bull is the stereotype. And this is about African Americans in the military. There were tens of thousands of African Americans in the military, in the US military based in England, who interacted with white people and particularly white women, and white American men took exception. And there was a, sort of description. Marcus Sherwood has written some of these things, but there are other people too. So that's on the military. So there are articles and there are actually also books about that. In terms of the Beatles, as you point out, it's very well documented that they were directly influenced by African American blues and jazz, Chuck Berry and many others, and several of the early albums are covers of African American songs. That's easy to identify. It's also clear that they were influenced by West African music. The story I've heard, I haven't confirmed, but it sounds persuasive, is that the Beatles used to go and improvise and jam on the ships, the African ships that were in Liverpool in the 1950s, maybe as late as the 60s. I remember going, I'm born in 57. And maybe when I was 7 or 8, I remember seeing it. And my dad used to go down to the ships, and he was a barber, and he'd put hair. Some of the people I interviewed in Liverpool-born blacks of mixed African and white origin, said they used to go and get food because there was a lot of African. So Gilroy has documented the way in which the ship was a vessel, literally and figuratively, for bringing music across the diaspora, and the Beatles certainly benefited. When I was growing up in Liverpool, the story I heard is that there was a fifth Beatle who was black, and the Beatles are racist, and they got rid of him. This was Woodbine. But it's now being acknowledged that he was their manager. These groups were changing managers like they were changing vests or undergarments. Okay? And Paul McCartney has acknowledged Woodbine was their manager. There were other black musicians. The most famous group are called the Chants, Chants. They were in Liverpool at the time. The story that, and a couple of them I think are still alive. The story that is being told is that at one point, the Beatles were the backing group to the Chants, and their manager didn't like it.
Really?
Yeah, so again, this is increasingly well documented. Other people like Derry Wilkie, these are people, there were a number of, if you look at images of black British, there were mainly men, a few women, not so many, bit later. It's not entirely clear that they're not African American, you know, the way they're formulated, they look like versions of the Temptation, except maybe more light skinned and certainly more African. Does that answer your
A film
question?
documenting all of that
Yeah,
would sweep the world.
a film,
A film,
yeah.
documentary style
Okay.
film.
Well, I'll tell you where to start. Yeah, I'd love to make a film. There are people doing that. There may already be one. The film I would recommend that's easy to get is called Everything, the Story of the Real Thing. The Real Thing was the best-selling black British group, had a number one hit in England in the 1970s. The song was called You to Me Are Everything. And I'd give you a rendition, but my karaoke practice is not so good at the moment. Okay. So that film, everything subtitled the Story of the Real Thing.
And the real thing is the group.
The Real Thing is the group. It was named after, they had different names, and then the manager saw a Coca-Cola advert, is the Real Thing. And unsurprisingly, my book is called The Real Thing, and I have some great interviews with them. And at least one or two, only two, it was a 4-person group, only 2 of them are still alive. And at least one of them was involved in the Chants. So that will give you the story, but it's mainly about them. The Real Thing really becomes successful in the 70s. There's an organization called Writing on the Wall. That is an arts and literature and cultural organization that engages with the politics of culture, is the way I would describe it. And, maybe it's something they would be interested in. There are more and more films coming out. But anyway, any other questions?
Is there any tradition of, what you would call the Black Church there in Liverpool? You mentioned these social clubs, but I didn't see any mention of religious organizations.
How to answer that? My experience and my reading suggests that there certainly were what we would call black churches in Liverpool, but they were far more in the domestic realm than in the public realm. I mean, it was services held in people's houses rather than black churches. I could be wrong. That's for the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Okay. My understanding is that, and there may be more. I certainly haven't seen any literature on that. I've looked for it. I haven't seen that. I wouldn't be surprised if black people in Liverpool went to Manchester to go to church. Manchester was far more likely to have those kind of organizations and those kind of churches, Pentecostal. There's a lot of work now on West Indian churches, particularly Pentecostal, and African, particularly West African churches. They certainly existed in all the cities outside Liverpool. Remember, because the West Indian population was much smaller. Okay, so they certainly were there, and there are a lot of people, the scholar in Birmingham, whose name slips me. And then since the 90s, there's been far more, a massive growth, I would say a massive growth in black churches run and organized by West Africans. And what I argue in my book and in my work is that in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, black culture in Britain was overwhelmingly West Indian. If you walked around London and saw posters for music, for stores, for food, black identity was black. There were Africans there, significant, including many people working against apartheid. But an African culture, I think, was not as prominent. Now in Britain, black culture is West African. That's my argument. Every major, and you can put this to the test, every major television actor or actress that you see is what I would call a British African. Yeah, including Idris Elba. Yeah, but just about all of these contemporary drama shows. I like to joke with my friends in England, it's all over for week Caribbeans. And I asked my dad was West Indian. Somebody said to me, why are you writing all this stuff about Africans when you're a West Indian? I said, hey, that's how it goes. I asked myself, what's going on? When I left England in the 80s, Britain had worked so decisively to keep black people out. Many of us thought and yet the black population's double, overwhelmingly African, whereas it was West Indian before. And now Africans, including British born, outnumber West Indians at least 2 to 1. And I ask myself, why is this? And the answer is so obvious. The English-speaking Caribbean, I estimate to have no more than 5 million black people. Africa's got 500 million who speak English and far more qualifications. So I think we're like, what about Afrobeats? You know, your Afrobeat music. Yeah, that's a new phenomenon. And that, you know, the only group we had in England was, do you ever heard of a, some of you might be old enough, a group called Osibisa? Look them up, they were the most popular. There were some African singers, but again, that became more in the 90s. So yeah, so the churches, yeah, it's an interesting question. Oh, I should, you know, Rastafari. The largest Rastafarian organization then, and probably still now, is called the 12 Tribes of Israel. There were very, and so they had meetings and reasoning sessions. I used to go to a lot of dances, a lot of discussion groups. They certainly would call themselves, you know, a faith community. I don't know if they call themselves a religion, a church, I'm not sure. But anyway, that's how I'd answer that question. So we have, yeah, oh, can I take this question from them? Go ahead.
This is an economic question, not a cultural question.
Mhm.
When deindustrialization came to Liverpool.
Yeah.
What was the impact briefly overall, but then more specifically on the black or mixed population?
Okay. The person I read on this is a guy called Michael Parkinson, who's retired from the University of Liverpool, extensive work on Liverpool's economic. And his argument, which I haven't seen contradicted, is that by the 1930s, that Liverpool thrived until the 1930s economically. All classes, the rich super thrived, but working class white thrived, largely because of slavery and imperialism. And from the 1930s, the city began a steep and steady decline until, and that was because of the decline of the port, the introduction of containerization, which you know, decimated the dock workers, the movement of British trade from the west of England to the east of England because of the European Union, okay, and also because of Liverpool's over reliance on manufacturing. All of that began to, so he provides data on these declines. So at a time in England in the 50s, when, to use the phrase, England had never had it so good, Liverpool had twice the rate of unemployment of the rest of the country. And I argue that's one of the reasons there are so few West Indians in England, in Liverpool, rather. Because when they arrived, they immediately went to Manchester, Birmingham. And I said to my dad, who came from Jamaica, I said, what's going on? You know, I tell this joke. I could be on the beach in Montego Bay, eating ackee and saltfish, and I'm eating boiled cabbage here. And my dad said, it didn't actually happen. But I did ask him, well, why did you come back? He said, listen, the reason I came to England is that there was an advert in the newspaper saying the mother country needs you. And I came to England to find jobs. The reason I stayed in Liverpool is that when I got here, I went to other cities. Manchester, too many black barbers. Birmingham, too many black barbers. And I came back to Liverpool. That was so that's it. So if that speaks to your question, so whites have suffered, and as you probably know, Liverpool has a very significant Irish population that goes back centuries. And one of the stories I tell, you know, the way I frame it is, you know, people say to me overwhelmingly in the US, you sound Irish. And I said, look, the reason I sound Irish to you is that half of Liverpool is Irish. And the story I tell, it's not entirely true, is that what's true is that to get from Ireland to the US in the 19th century, you had to go to Liverpool. That was what, and you get to Liverpool, you find a job, you don't go to the US, or you go eventually. Okay, so that's the unemployment situation. That since the 1980s, things changed around. I remember vividly, you know, I'd fly into London, I'd drive, and I remember in the 90s driving in, I saw this big sign, Liverpool Maritime City. I was like, where did that come from? Massive tourism, you know, multiple Beatles museums and statues. There's a new statue of John Lennon in Liverpool this summer. I took a photo because I have to show my people here in the US. They want to see, so I took a photo. I can show you if you like. Bus tours, the Yellow Submarine bus tour, that kind of thing. A massive increase in number of students. Black people overwhelmingly have not benefited. The rates of unemployment have remained just as high, double are higher for black men and women than they are for whites. And, so it remains quite desperate. But there are, the book I'm writing finishes in the early 2000s because the economic fortunes of the city changed dramatically. And also the composition of the black population changes because there are several thousand refugees from Somalia who are to England, who are redirected to Liverpool. There's a long-established small black Somali population. And also many more Africans from British colonies we hadn't seen in Liverpool before, like Zimbabwe and Botswana, and also from Francophone colonies like Rwanda and so on. So that's the economic question. So you go to Liverpool now, it seems to be quite thriving for white people. And again, I was speaking to my friend Jimmy when I was there this summer, and I said, it used to be dangerous for us to even step out of Liverpool 8 when we were teenagers. He said, well, look, that sheer brutality has diminished. He said, but I wouldn't go on a Saturday night after the pub. People might. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
So
That's your question.
let me go back to politics of Liverpool. Now, historically, this colorblind guise has been used to reduce the political power of minorities, i.e., you do citywide races rather than by district, by where populations actually live. So you don't have representatives from that district or one or two, but you have to quite vote citywide so that those minorities are basically not able to compete with the vote. How did that was that a factor? I mean, what's the situation now? And when did that kind of start? When is there in fact now some kind of representation politically? Political power can also be
amongst black people.
Yes.
In Liverpool, no.
Yeah. No.
Short answer is no. But let me put it this way: there's a bit more to it than that. So Liverpool, like most cities in England, is a combination of citywide or district-wide and city-specific. So members of parliament are elected by districts, which could be, I think Liverpool has 2 or 3 members of parliament. Liverpool got its first black member of parliament and first black woman 3 years ago. Kim Johnson is the first black member of parliament ever, male or female. Okay, so clearly she had to have a lot of white support. There were 3 years ago, there were 2 black mayors of the city. One was ceremonial and one was elected, but they're no longer in office. In short, black people in Liverpool have had great difficulty getting elected to the city council. There may be 1 or 2, there's certainly an Asian, by which I mean somebody of Indian or Pakistani background, or Middle Eastern, Yemeni. There may be 1 or 2 black politicians, but I don't think so. There certainly wasn't by the start of the 2000s. And so it hasn't been able, some people, no, wait a minute, there was a black woman, Liz Drysdale became the first city councillor, but she didn't run what I would call on a black ticket. She ran on a different kind of ticket. So, but you couldn't get, although black people are overwhelmingly concentrated in that area, you'd have to be involved in working class politics, and there's particular antagonisms with working class politics, which does remind me, I've left discussion of gender implicit, although clearly the ways in which sailors arrived, the ways in which interracial, this is all irrepressibly gendered. But black women have been at the forefront of, all of the black organizations. The research I've done reveals, and it's no surprise that every black organization that existed in Liverpool, except perhaps 1 or 2, had black women in a majority. And black women then set up separate organizations because the men wouldn't cooperate or wouldn't engage with the same kind of issues. It's no new story. So black women have been central to that. And also one of the questions I've asked is that some of the black women that were involved in these organizations, a significant number, had white mothers. And I'm curious as to how, and given that, one of the reasons when I interview people, they set up these black women's organizations is black men wouldn't listen, but white women would listen. And I'm curious how that unfolded, and I didn't get to ask those questions. I did ask some of the women in Liverpool, Black Sisters, that was the most well-known one, how they dealt with white women. And they said, look, if white women came to our organization, we wouldn't turn them away, but we'd redirect them to other organizations where there was that could deal with their issues, homelessness, domestic violence, jobs, education. But I'm curious around that, some of the most prominent Black female activists with white mothers.
One last question, if I may.
Well, Teresa's in charge. You tell me when I need
Go
to
for it.
stop. Yeah.
One last question.
Please.
That
They
is,
don't want-
that is,
Oh, yeah.
and that
I
is-
have to make, I have to stop at 1:25.
Okay, quickly, you said when manufacturing came, that really exacerbated the gap between employment and blacks and before. So my question is, I don't understand that. Why wouldn't black population be employed in manufacturing? Because you have so many different jobs in that they can have low-level jobs, higher-level. I don't understand why they weren't being employed in manufacturing.
Well, some of them were. Some of the people I interviewed were employed in manufacturing as welders or in Ford's Motor Company, which was big in Liverpool. But tiny numbers, and the way I would explain it is, again, the rates, thanks very much, the rates of black unemployment, regardless of age, have always been much higher. The way I would explain it is that the majority of black people are in one district. If you get a job outside the district, it's going to be verbal abuse. It was verbal abuse. You're going to be the only black person. They're going to be telling racist jokes, making, racist stories. It's a country in the 1970s. We still had the black and white minstrel show. Very popular. We had all these racist comic books, racist TV shows, talking about NIGGERS and all that. So I think similarly, black people, mixed families would move out of Liverpool 8. The kids would go to school. It was racism every day. I went to a white school. It was racism all day, every day, even from the teachers. So, so I'm not saying there was none. I'm saying that the rates of unemployment were much higher. And some of it clearly would also have to do with, who was able to get qualification. And also, what's the right phrase? The trade unions' internal advertising, the jobs went to white people first. If you're going to internally advertise, you tell your friends, you tell your family, you tell your members, and these things I know happen in the US.
So
That's it.
So it's interesting that if, even to be mixed, the identity is one both internally and in how you perceive that you are black.
Yeah. Well, that's true, but that I would say that's from the 80s. See, up until the 70s, here's how I describe it. And some of my friends say, look, don't discuss this. Up until the 80s, people like me who had a white mother and black, we called ourselves half caste, and we're all ashamed and embarrassed by it. And from the late 80s, people like me, we wouldn't allow anyone to say half caste. Okay. And when I told my father I was half caste, he said, stop that nonsense, it's stupidness. So you're negotiating, and because so many of my friends, 99% of my friends had African fathers and white mothers, and we all called ourselves half caste, and women did too. Okay. And, to have an African identity was just not popular. It wasn't popular in the Caribbean to have an African identity in this. And then there's this political transformation with major impact from Black Power, and say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. From all of that was the biggest single influence. Also with the massive anti-apartheid struggles and African Liberation Day, and then with Mugabe and the Mandelas. So there's this transformation into, the most common phrase becomes Liverpool born black. That's popular, as opposed to Black British. And what I argue in my book is that Black British concept is invented in the 80s to describe West Indian parents with their children. But in Liverpool born black is designed to denote a population that goes back much further. There's no such thing as a London born black or a Birmingham born black or a Manchester born black. They're Black British. So it's a sort of distinction. So there's this what I call tension and ambivalence around African identity and around being mixed race that continues. But to white people in Liverpool, black, they have special skills to determine who's got this, so-called single drop of blood. And again, of course, this is changing as the African, population in England and in Liverpool has become, many more recent immigrants and many more varied parts of Africa.
So in some ways for you, this is a kind of full circle moment, yes, where you've been doing so much research on, over the last many decades, and to come back to this topic in a way is sort of to.
Yeah, I was telling a friend and he said, "You're writing your homage to Liverpool." And I said, "Yeah, I guess I am." So, I've been working with people in Liverpool for decades, because it's a small Black community. And I have what I call the dubious honor of being the first Black person born and raised in Liverpool to have a PhD. It's a strange kind of thing. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And so I've been interacting. I still have a grown-up son and daughter and a brother there. I've done more in the last 10 years, but I've always, interacted. I've been going in and out doing interviews. And, about once a year, I'd get a letter from a stranger, in Liverpool. Someone, they're saying, "I'm working on Black Liverpool." And they said, "Write to Stephen Small." Basically, I try to write. And I'm mentoring some people, right now, that some of the people I interviewed for the book who set up these organizations, there isn't a book on Liverpool Black sisters. There's some articles and things. So, I'm talking to people and it's clear there's vast, very significant amounts of documents. Yeah. So I've been working with some people. The guy who set up Steve Biko Housing Association, it's a fascinating study, but it's not foremost. And so I've been working with some individuals. So yeah, it's like a homecoming. I have this article I did with a Black newspaper in London in 1991. Somebody told him, he's the guy from Liverpool with the PhD and the interview. And they called the article "Brain Box Professor Vows to Remember His Roots." Brain box is a joke word for somebody who's working class who's done well. And I'm like, I've come back now, although I never really left.
Oh, that's a.
We've got a question here.
And the white women and the Black women, how do they get along?
Well, it's tension over dating, it's tension over relationships, similar kinds of things here, but different manifestations, at least, celebrity Black men with white wives, that kind of thing, soccer players and all of that. But at the same time, they have white mothers, so there are.
A question from Liverpool.
Oh, I see, yeah. Who's gonna deal with that?
Yeah, I'm gonna ask Jack how we can get to that.
Yeah, so this is my friend Jim.
This is the first time that we're doing
Yeah.
that.
Oh, you know what, and I have to finish, oh no, we've got 5 minutes, then I have a video. So,
Jack, how can we get his friend on here to speak?
permission to talk.
Well, how can we do that though? Where do you do it?
He said Jim should be able to speak, I think.
Yeah, but can you,
Jimmy,
how can he do it?
Can you hear us?
All right, Jim, can you hear us? Jimmy?
can you find a way to
He
speak?
needs permission to speak.
Is there a button?
I gave him permission to talk. We can hear him typing. We can hear him typing.
Oh, we can hear you typing. Oh, so Jimmy, just go ahead and speak.
But so there are white women who grew up with Black women in the neighborhood,
Can you show
and
the
that's
question?
mainly, cordial and close friendships and similar kinds of politics. But the white women from outside the neighborhood, I would say, is, very different kinds of politics. And because, Black people in this period were mainly in this area, what I've come to conclude is the only time we interacted with the majority of white people was when they came on the bus through the area or in the city center. So the segregation is, entrenched.
No, he's not able to hear super well. But hopefully we captured it still on the tape.
Okay, well, we get that. That's my close friend. We published a book recently called Black Liverpool, Past and Present, that looks at some of the prominent Black voices. I'll have to finish in a minute or so
Yes.
because I have to go. So can we take one last question and then?
Well, is there?
Did I get your question enough? Yeah.
So I would like to hear, partly for reasons of taping, for you just to sort of, it was a great way to sort of end by talking about sort of this homage, right? Coming
Yeah.
back and not that you ever really left, right? But if you can just kind of say a couple of sentences to kind of round it all out. And what is the implications? What does this mean to you? It's a little bit, just even if some of that is
Okay.
a repeat.
A
Just kind of a summary.
a brief-
end with that.
reflective soliloquy.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Bob Marley said some people have ways and means. No. Bob Marley said some people have hopes and dreams. Some people have ways and means. And the black community in Liverpool, including my family, gave me the ways and means to get to Berkeley. And Berkeley gave me the ways and means to achieve the kinds of levels of research, to travel to all these countries that you mentioned, and to get a new perspective on the distinctiveness of blackness and the black experience in Liverpool. I first published an article. I'll send you some of the articles I've written. I've got some book chapters on that. So the way I would frame it is that I left Liverpool, but Liverpool never left me. And I lived in Liverpool, and Liverpool still lives in me. And I expect in future years to do more and more work in Liverpool. I'm already on some committees, and to work with a new generation of people who are actively interested in this research, who welcome some guidance and some guidelines, and who will do their own thing. I've actually started to write more articles for what I call a community audience, and I published them with this organization, Writing on the Wall, and to bring up these issues in that way. So that's how I describe it. Yeah, and my friends and family in Liverpool say, please come to Liverpool, but don't come in January or February. My daughter begged me not to come. So maybe I have to go, we'll see. But yeah, I expect I'll continue like that. And the final thing I said is, I speak like I'm born and bred in Liverpool, and I'll probably continue to speak like that for the rest of my life. Okay, thanks. Is that all right? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.